Hi, I'm Iheoma Iruka, a mother of two young Black children. I was Chief Research Officer at high school. I'm now a Public Policy Research Professor at the University of North Carolina. I'm a trained applied developmental psychologist, but really, I call myself a social justice researcher. My research is focused on action and pushing for justice. We have been talking about early mental health and adverse child experiences, also known as ACEs, for many, many years. ACEs has become a proxy for the amount of trauma and mental health stress a child experiences. Unfortunately, the indicators of ACEs do not mention racism or racialized trauma. Yet we know that race based traumatic stress presents with a variety of symptoms and has lifelong consequences, like diabetes and predisposition for heart disease, to name a couple. Through their experiences with other children and adults, by age 3, children know themselves and others in racial and ethnic terms, grounded in a society where race continues to matter. We see skin color being used and weaponized as a form of exclusion and social isolation for children and their families and communities. When my own child was 3, she came up to me, scratching her skin, trying to make it look white. And it's not just my daughter, of course. The Clark and Clark doll test has been updated and still shows the same sad results. Just Google it. Black children are particularly vulnerable to racial trauma because they may not have yet developed a sophisticated cognitive understanding or the effective language with which to process the ongoing effects of racism. All is not lost. Luckily, my daughter is now proud of her brown skin, and it didn't take therapy, just some attention. The early childhood field, including social and emotional development, claims that we must care for the whole child. Yet we lack discussion about race and racism, which ensures that children of color, especially Black children, will continue to be dehumanized and traumatized. And this is in a field that was built on the backs of Black people. It is imperative that we find a way to ensure that Black and other marginalized children feel protected, affirmed, and loved. Research shows without these protective factors, young children are not in a position to learn. And the innovation so desperately needed today don't have to come only from Silicon Valley. Most innovations actually come out of survival and necessity. And we can look for solutions in spaces and communities often forgotten and underinvested in. I think about a childcare provider, Daniela, who had to remain open to serve essential employees during the early days of the pandemic. Out of necessity and her 30 years of experience, she created her own informal pipeline and bartering system with grocery stores and other supply chains to ensure that her staff and the children and families were safe with PPE, food, and so forth. This pipeline led to connections with families who lived close by to barter and share childcare duties. She created a pod before the learning pods we think of today. It is so heartening to see parts of the early child community creating affirming and safe spaces for Black children, especially. I see the early child community focusing on structural inequities and not trying to fix children and families. And at a systems level, I see efforts to support the whole child in ways that counter the racism built into the system. The Ideal Learning Head Start Network is merging what some consider programs for the white and the privileged, like Montessori and Reggio, with Head Start programs that target children of color and children from low wealth homes. To do this means confronting racism head on. That is, we have to ask, why are certain programs funded in a particular way with certain expectations? Why are certain children allowed freedom and thought and movement and others aren't? Why are the standards not built to ensure that families have access to the best programs rather than programs for poor people? These examples show that we have to get into good trouble, as the late John Lewis said, and challenge the status quo and fight for what matters for children. I hope that we don't need the continual beat of another Black person being murdered on camera to speak up, show up, and stand up. Part of early childhood started with standing up for justice and a fair start for our children. One of the benefits of early childhood is helping children to persevere even in the face of unimaginable obstacles. What will it take for each of us to get into good trouble?